Retro.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the Armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode features the second edition of Laugh It Up Fuzzball, in which we look at notable Star Wars parodies and satire. But before we get to the funnies, Jay, remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
What you gonna do? You're gonna find us on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
You beat me to it. I was so going to sing that. Okay. I am.
Dang, you can still sing it.
No,
Take
that's
the
all
floor,
right.
Dennis. Go for it.
Oh, we've been podcasting together too long. All right.
Right.
The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So bad boys beware. I'll just go with that. So we're talking about Troops. And this was a fan film created in 1997, which debuted at San Diego Comic-Con. It's a 10-minute mockumentary that parodies both Star Wars and I don't know, it's just to call it a reality show, but it's a live action show that follows around, it's a documentary. It follows around the police called Cops. Is it even still on anymore? But it was
That's a
big in
good
the
question.
90s.
It
But
was.
yeah, I always used to go catch one of my fraternity brothers was watching it. He actually became a police officer. And so he was very interested in the show. And anytime I'd go up to his room, he'd be watching this in the afternoon after lunch in class. But at any rate, it was directed by Kevin Rubio and produced by Kevin Rubio, Shant Jordan, and Patrick Perez. Kevin Rubio is someone whose work that you might be familiar with. After this, he became a freelance writer. He wrote comic books for Dark Horse's Star Wars Tales line. He also wrote the Tag and Bink Are Dead, which is the Star Wars spoof of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which is based on Shakespeare. And he wrote the Bombad Jedi episode of the Clone Wars. In 2006, he was made an honorary member of the 501st. And in 2015, he released another Star Wars parody film called Akbar's 11, which I have to admit, I haven't seen that one yet. So I'm going to have to look that one up later. This film, leading into the whole Cops parody, uses the Bad Boys music. It was written by Inner Circle that plays during all those episodes. And this is notable because it was one of the first fan films of the internet age.
Mm-hmm.
And Jay, you and I remember a time when there wasn't internet, and then there was an internet, and you couldn't do a whole lot with it. It was just good from some static pages, but video on the internet really started to merge at the end of the 90s. And so you'd start to get stuff like this. This is pre-YouTube. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. So first I have to say, I'm very impressed with the fact that you gave the breakdown of Kevin Rubio's, biography essentially and filmography, because I had no idea that he was involved in some of these other things, especially, as you said, the Bombad Jedi episode of the Clone Wars. So I think that's super cool. But yeah, you're talking about, like you said, this is pre-YouTube. This is the dial-up era, when like streaming a fan film was still revolutionary, and this thing spread like wildfire on fan sites and forums. It went viral before being viral was actually a thing. And that's what I think is so much fun about revisiting this, is that it is cheesy. It's campy by today's standards. It's like, what the heck is this? But at the time, it really was revolutionary. And it's brilliant. It's a brilliant homage.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to jump out of order then, because you brought this up, and I want to strike while the iron's hot on this topic. Do you remember seeing it back in the late 90s, early 2000s?
I do only once, I think, and it
Mhm.
was one of those things that I saw in passing and was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so funny," and then that was
Yeah.
it, and it wasn't until I rewatched it that I really remembered it, because I know when you and I were talking about doing these, I was like, "I don't know if I've ever seen this before," and so I had to, look it up on YouTube now, and then once I started watching it, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I remember this." I mean, how can you not with the,
Yeah.
bad boys and the whole 9 yards. So it all came back to me, not specific detail, but it was like, yeah, I remember this now.
Right. Yeah, it's very memorable, and we'll get into some of the reasons why when we start talking about the thing itself. But yeah, I remember seeing a link to this on a website like theforce.net or something, and watching it there and thinking it was a lot of fun, and probably watched it 3 or 4 times back then. But like yourself, I haven't seen it in 15 years, 15, 20 years, for that, somewhere around
Mhm.
there.
Okay.
But when we started talking about doing this series, this is one of the things that came immediately to mind after Hardware Wars, because this was influential, and it is, it was an inspiration to a lot of people who have made fan films that came after it here. Did you ever watch Cops back in the day?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Definitely.
Like I said, this wasn't something. It wasn't something I typically watched on my own, but again, I had friends in college that would watch it on occasion, and so if I wanted to hang out, that's what we did on the thing.
Mhm.
And it is. Cops was kind of like watching the car accident that you couldn't turn away from.
Sure.
When if you had that episode on there, just seeing the typical format for that was, you'd follow the police from the moment they got dispatched. Then they show up at the scene of whatever's going on. It could be a domestic dispute, could be someone gets pulled over or whatever it is, and then you go all the way through them, like getting their citation, and then if the police leave, or them arresting someone and taking them to the police station or wherever the case may be. And then, it was, like I said, filmed on location, and it was kind of a ride along type of a series for that. And so
Mhm.
keep that in mind as we start talking about this.
Right.
Um, Again, before we get into the details of it, we mentioned that they went ahead and used the music "Bad Boys" by Inner Circle, just like they did in Cops, and it actually had a cast that's done real stuff. And by that, I mean people who have IMDb pages that don't just include like fan film work on it. And that's not a put down here, but I'm talking about like industry
Sure.
work.
Mhm.
Up first, we've got Jess Harnell, who does who does the voice of Officer Damon Mott. Jess Harnell does the voice of Wacko Warner in the Animaniacs. He did the voice of Ironhide in the Michael Bay Transformer films. He's the key actor that does Crash Bandicoot, and he's done voices for Star Trek Lower Decks. So
Wow.
again,
Yeah.
a known voice acting talent that they got for this. Similarly, we got Cam Clark, who does the voice of Captain Janix Bach. I think that's how you pronounce it, Bach or Bach. He's done voice work for Akira. He did the voice of Leonardo and Rocksteady in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series. And then he's done voice work for Star Wars The Old Republic, Knights of the Fallen Empires expansion.
Okay.
And
So
then,
that's pretty darn impressive on both of those.
right. And then the big get out of all this is Bill Farmer, who is the announcer for the series, who is the voice of Goofy. Of all
Wow.
things. So
Wow.
I didn't dive into Kevin Rubio's accomplishments beyond what I listed here, but I wanted to know what he did to get all these people to do this here. Um,
Yeah.
we had a nice little documentary of the making of Hardware Wars. I'd love to get
Mhm.
one for this, but I couldn't find one out there. So
Yeah, that would be super cool. Like, what was the impetus for this? The inspiration as far as like what made them decide to do this collection of people with this particular satire.
yeah,
Yeah,
well,
I'm
how do
with
you
you.
approach them? I'm making this fan film. I'd love you to do the voice of one of the stormtroopers.
Right. Right.
What's your pitch on that? But at
Yeah.
any rate, so whatever they did, it worked. And so, or maybe these people were just friends beforehand and one person got them another. I don't know, but it would just
Yeah,
be
or
interesting to
just
know.
Star Wars fans, you know what I mean? Like, they
Mhm.
just decided to get together and just have some goofy fun. And I will say though, I mean, it's when you watch this, I mean, anybody who's listening to this that hasn't seen it, you gotta go into it fresh because it's even all these years later, it's still worth watching fresh, and
It
I
holds
just
up.
think that
Yeah.
oh, it does, and I
Mhm.
mean, the everything is awesome in terms of the costumes are spot on. The where they filmed it is spot on. I mean, there's a few things, special effects, quote, unquote, that might not be perfect, but I mean, all in all, it's awesome. It's really spot on.
Right. So to your point, if you haven't seen this, I'm gonna try to remember to put a link to it on YouTube in the show notes. Go watch it and then come back for the rest of this discussion, because it's only 10 minutes long. You're not going to lose a whole lot of time going to watch it. And it's a well worthwhile, fun 10 minutes to go watch. Okay, so
Mhm.
I've said that enough. I've paused long enough. Let's get back into the discussion here. Before we get into the details of the film, I will mention that this won the Pioneer Award at the 2002 official Star Wars Fan Film Awards, which I admit I'd never heard of before this. But anyway, there we go. So just like Cops, this starts off with an announcer coming on, and just kind of giving their not necessarily disclaimer, but this is what's going on. Which it's filmed on location, and he says, "Troops is filmed on location with the men and of the Imperial forces. All suspects are guilty. Period. Otherwise, they wouldn't be suspect, would they?" So right off the bat, you're getting a little bit of humor. But while that's happening, they mimic the opening theme to Cops. They're playing the bad boy music, and then you got the stormtroopers just kind of randomly out on the desert on their speeder bikes patrolling, and then you get one of them kind of like approaching Boba Fett, who's supposed to be suspicious character here, and then just you get a few clips that tease what's going to come later in this whole documentary here. But right out of the gate, they set this up like an episode of Cops, and it really works.
Yeah, it does. And it's funny because I think that the, accent, I wanna say it's probably a Chicago
Fargo.
accent as he's talking, Fargo accent,
Yeah,
kinda thing, and
that
he's just like,
Minnesota
"Yeah,
and
this is
yeah.
yeah, this is what we're doing out here today," and then he's just talking to the Jawa just like, "Alright, so, you got this going on, and we gotta see some papers, and you got" just like a normal cop would try to, interrogate someone that was trying to, maybe not uphold the law, but giving them the benefit of the doubt for it kind of thing.
Right, because the whole thing is, like, it's the classic situation where they've caught up with some suspicious characters, and so they're trying to question them. They're doing a stop here, and the people that they're questioning are being elusive. And so, they get them separated, and they're trying to talk to one, the other one keeps interfering and stuff like that. And, and it's all because they got a call about stolen droids. And in this
Mhm.
case, they spoof another spoof, and that it's Tom Servo from Mystery Science Theater 3000, one of the robots from that
Yes.
series there. And they're asking the Jawas, like, well, you got your receipt? Oh, you don't have a receipt. The droid belongs to your cousin. Well, is that your cousin over there? Oh no, that's a friend.
Yeah,
Stuff like that.
yeah.
And as as it becomes more and more apparent that the droids are not on the up and up, the cops start, in on the threats with arrest and that type of a thing. The kicker of all this is that this is their alternative explanation as to what happened to the Jawa sandcrawler in A New Hope. It's
Yep.
not that they burned it down because they were looking for R2D2 and C3PO. It's because the Jawas weren't cooperative when they are
Yep.
investigating the report of a stolen droid, and so they shot it up with a TIE fighter.
And they were very, very much on point with their
Yeah.
shooting ability this time around, for sure.
Well, did you
They
notice
didn't
when because the
know.
first Jawa runs off, oh, we got a runner, and then they shoot that one in the back. But then when the second one runs off, they miss with the first shot. So
Yes,
they didn't give them the pinpoint accuracy that
not
Ben claims that they
completely.
have. Right, in A
But
New
I
Hope.
just I just thought that, the troopers that were there were actually like, they had personalities, you got
Uh-huh.
this grizzled vet who's, like, seen things, and you're over eager rookie, and then there's the guy who, he just wants to file a report before lunch break kinda thing. So I
Well, and
think
then you
that's
were talking about Captain Janix Bach there. He was the one that with that Fargo like accent. Yeah, and they were
yeah.
mimicking that Fargo there. When this whole thing starts, he's on his speeder bike, and he's just talking about, yeah, when I was growing up, I used to see the stormtroopers and stuff, and so I got older. And I'm paraphrasing; I'm not getting the lines correct. I joined up with the Force, and I got stationed out here on Tatooine. It's the same way they talk. When the
Right.
officers are talking about their background on cops, it's just like, and yeah, after so many years, I kind of know everybody around here. I know my way, and we're just out here trying to do some good. Just
Mhm.
completely,
Love and life.
yeah,
Yep.
not the stormtrooper way when it comes down to it. But here he is,
Yep.
just a backwoods police officer that this is where he's stationed. He knows everybody, and they keep everything in line.
And I was just thinking to myself as I was watching this too, is that how cool is it that this actually paved the way for so many other parodies that we've gotten since then? I mean, the first
Hmm.
thing that comes to mind is, Gary and Robot Chicken, because
Hmm.
we get, a very different view of the everyman's stormtrooper kind of thing in that series as well, which I can't wait to break down. But yeah, it's just the same kind of thing. Like, here's these real dudes, out doing their job, and they've got, real stresses and real lives and, real personalities. And they're just them doing, like you said, doing their job.
Hmm. Hmm. So after they deal with the Jawas, they get another call, and I love this. They do the dispatcher calls to the
Yes.
stormtroopers here, again keeping with how they did things on cops, and they've got a report of a domestic dispute at a moisture farm, and it's clearly Owen and Baru.
Yeah.
And when they get there, we got Baru, who's clearly in distress, and she's carrying on about how you know they've been fighting, and then Luke had come in and talked about how he thought some droids that they just had purchased might have been stolen, and then Owen is not letting Luke go to the academy, and that he's going to need him on for another season, and he never treats Luke fairly, and so Luke ran away when we know that that's not the case. Luke went to find the droids that ran off, and in the meantime, they've clearly had a fight, and Owen's got a scratch on his ear, and so it's every domestic dispute episode of Cops just shows up here in this little 4 or 5 minutes of the whole thing. And the stormtroopers separate them. They kind of start talking to her, but what do you want me to do? And the problem we got is that he's got the injury. So if anyone's going to get arrested, it's you. Do you want us to take somewhere? And then so they're getting the whole thing settled down. And every time people start to get worked up, they get worked up a little bit. Then they de-escalate everything. This is just clever when it came down to it. I mean, I don't know what the inspiration exactly that made Rubio think of this was, but very, very well done.
Yeah, for sure, and it just cracked me up how the one trooper was saying to Baru, "We should be arresting you for assault right now." And, let's just say that, if we all know what happened at the Lars homestead, and this puts a very different context twist on it through a little bit of blundering and oops energy kind of thing
Right, right. So to
going
your
on.
point, Baru says, yeah, she wants to go someplace else tonight because they aren't going to arrest Owen. So she goes to get her things, and she comes back with a crate of thermal detonators.
Mhm.
And that's what ends up blowing up her and Owen, not the
Yeah,
stormtroopers killing them there. So that's our
exactly.
second alteration from A New Hope there. But it is funny, like when all this is going on, one of the stormtroopers mutters on his breath, he's like, I just so want to shoot these people. I mean,
Right.
so it's it's a neat little alternative telling of what happened on Tatooine. And another great part of this is that they're leaving, they get a call of a disturbance at the Mos Eisley Cantina.
Mhm.
So we all know what that is, with Pondo Baba getting his arm sliced off by Obi-Wan Kenobi. But
Right,
yeah.
right. It's too bad there wasn't a Troops 2, That would've been a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, this is something that had they wanted to, they could have made more of these. I suppose it's a thing that is funny in small doses, but might have worn thin because how much you could parody Cops and Star Wars in this segment of A New Hope, but how do you really take that into an Empire Strikes Back?
Sure.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying it can't be done because I wouldn't have thought to do this, but I
Mhm.
suspect it gets more difficult with each successive move because you know the best place may have been the beginning of Return of the Jedi. having the stormtroopers there check out what happened on that and getting alternative explanations for what happened to the
Oh,
Sarlacc and
yeah.
the like and Jabba's sail barge. And we got a disturbance of a major vehicle explosion, and so we're going to check it out. And
Right.
yeah, those type of things. Oh,
Yeah.
this is tragic. Burning huts smells terrible. Uh, we'll have to sit down and write the script for that one ourselves sometime.
There you go, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've already got, fun little, like, lyric versions for the Bad Boys song, but we'll get into that maybe another time. But no, I think to your point too, this is one of those things that it's a gem of its own time. It's kind of like a time capsule in a lot of
Mhm.
ways too, I mean, like we were saying, it was really a pioneer in its own age, and I mean, quite honestly, I kinda miss those days. I mean, like we were talking about, these are the kinds of things that were, like, shown on, you said, like, forums and fan sites. They were burned to CDs, and, like, given
Sure.
away to each other, and even shown at, like, fan conventions, I'm sure, like some
Well,
kind
it
of,
debuted at
like,
San Diego Comic-Con, to your point.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, there you go, and so it's just you don't get that kinda stuff anymore. As
Well,
much as it's
yeah,
great to have things at our fingertips, I mean, this is special.
right. To your point, when this was made, there wasn't short form content. And by that, I mean TikTok and Reels on Instagram here. Now everybody can do this. They can make their
Mm,
own little, 60-second videos and they put them out there. I follow and watch plenty of those of Reels. So I'm
sure,
not putting it down.
sure,
But the thing that gets sacrificed is this longer form storytelling, something that's a well thought out 10-minute piece or whatever right now. And, so much what we see now is borrowing footage from the movies and then making a meme out of it, or people stitching together other people's videos and reacting to it. So, and it's just, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without being insulted, but the thought isn't there. The resources
sure.
aren't there on this.
Mhm.
And um, with the abundance that we have of this material, we don't just get if you're trying to go viral, why would you invest your money in this when you
Mhm.
can make a 60-second you could just make in that same amount of time, you can make 160-second videos and
Sure.
put them out there on a platform, and there you go.
Right, right. And again, that's what makes this so special,
Mhm, mhm.
you know?
But the gags didn't end there with this. During if you read the credits, they tell you who performed everything, but then in the end they give some disclaimers, such as Star Wars and all Star Wars characters created by George Lucas, property of Lucasfilm Limited, used without permission for this not-for-profit production. Thanks in advance for not suing us, George. And then after that, you get
Oh my
no
god.
Jawas were harmed during the making of this parody. So
Oh, wow, that's funny. Now,
yeah.
did George Lucas ever respond to this one like he did, we talked about with Hardware Wars, and, some of the interactions that he had with the makers of that? Do you
Right.
know if there was any kind of, George Lucas stamp of approval or disapproval, or,
Well,
indifference?
yeah, I remember with Hardware Wars, we had the claim that that was his favorite Star Wars parody, but
Right. Yeah.
I didn't find anything as concrete other than various places that were talking about this, saying that Kevin Rubio apparently had heard from George Lucas or talked to George Lucas, and George liked this. He thought it was funny.
Okay.
So yeah, and why wouldn't he? I mean, it is I think this is exactly the type of thing that's up his alley on this. He is a guy who likes to get out and experiment and make films, and that's what this was. A couple guys, they got some good talent. You remember the beginning of this? It's there's an ATST standing out there in the middle of the desert. There is
Mhm.
a Imperial shuttle that takes off that flies around for a little bit. To the comment you were making earlier, they did a really good job with the special effects, given the limitations that they were working with
Mhm. They
on
sure
this. And I
did.
could see, even if it wasn't a funny spoof, this would be the type of thing that George would be impressed by.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I talk like I know him, but I haven't talked to him in like 6 weeks. So, all right.
Oh, okay. So hard flex there. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Any other thoughts you have on this before we wrap it up?
Oh, like I said, I mean, it's just a gem. And if you've got
Yeah.
10 minutes and a soft spot for the absurd side of the force, then go for it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Hardware Wars may have been the first, but this is one of my favorites, I think. Just
Mhm.
because, there's nothing wrong with Hardware Wars, but this one just so seamlessly parodied both Star Wars and Cops, mashed them up together in a way I don't think would have occurred to many people. And as we were just talking about here, the fact that it went viral in the way it did at the beginning, a new age, and the internet age, just cements it in its own special place. So
Yes, and may the force be with you. There
exactly.
you go.
All right. Well,
That's
then,
terrible
just
on
want
my part, but,
I liked it. Good job.
oh,
All right.
thanks.
Well, then we'll just say thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of troops on this edition of Laugh It Up Fuzzball. We hope you've enjoyed it. I don't know when we're going to do the next edition of Laugh It Up Fuzzball because we're trying not to make this a monthly series because we got so many things going on month to month as it is. But we will be back hopefully sometime in the next month or two with another one of these, and we'll let you know in advance what it is. But if you have enjoyed it and you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. Rate, review, those type of things. That helps us out immensely with others being able to find the show. And then if you want more podcast artists beyond the 1 or 200 episodes that your podcatcher is likely to carry, head over to retrozap.com, where you can find all previous episodes of this show, as well as other great podcasts on the network, including Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Case Files, Enemy Cast, Brews and Blasters, Dork Lair, Doomcast, Enjoy Stuff, Love, Death, and Robots Plus, which should be back soon because they finally announced when season 4 is coming out, Superhero Suite, and Warp Trails. Jay, you want to go ahead and tell everybody again what our social media contacts are and where else they can find us online?
Yes, so in this internet day and age, you can very easily find us on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we're also on that little platform known as Pinterest, so you can check that out with all kinds of fun ideas for everything Star Wars. And as Dennis mentioned briefly, we also have our YouTube site. So we have our regular YouTube as well as YouTube Music, so you can get all of our episodes there. And that also allows you to subscribe and not miss an episode, as well as put your thoughts in as well. So you can do that on our social media sites, but we really like to see that on those YouTube sites as well. So if you've seen Troops or if you want to comment with your favorite memories or your insights, we would love to hear it. And we also have our TeePublic store. So we have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of things from home goods to apparel. So if you'd love to support the show, and we'd love to see you support us, we have our link in the show notes that you can go ahead and do that.
All right. Jay, what is going on with cosplay?
So cosplay, really easy to find me. I am on Instagram at j.snipscosplay. So you can check out all of the fun things that I'm up to as Ahsoka, the fourth sister, my 2 different versions of Hera, as well as my original concept Mandalorian, and much, much more. So I've been saying I have a few things coming up here in May that I'll be able to give a few more details about very soon. But until then, once again, j.snipscosplay on Instagram.
All right. Upcoming on the show this Friday, we end the week with a look at recent Star Wars news. And then on Monday, we are getting back into the Clone Wars rewatch with season 2, episode 8, which is the 4th episode in the Geonosian story arc. So make sure you come back for that. So with all that said, thanks for listening to episode 874 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.